And I'm absolutely delighted to be here to talk about diversity, inclusion, and empowerment. And I'm going to talk about how it can not just help your business, but be the reason that it survives and thrives. And along the way, I'll throw in some kind of practical steps that other organizations have taken and a few elephant traps to avoid along the way. Now, if like me, you're interested in the subject, you will, and you've been around a wee while, you will have been to many, many talks about diversity. Sometimes it does seem as if we're going round in a loop, or that progress is glacially slow. Many times in my life, I've been told, you mustn't be too impatient. Things will gradually evolve and change over time. Well, the hell with that. Evolution took billions of years, and I'm really not that patient. So this talk is about how we can step up the pace and make the change in the here and now. And I'm going to define diversity in its widest sense. So not just race, gender, disability, class, region, or sexual orientation, but everything that makes each of us think, act, and draw on a hinterland of experience that's individual to each of us. And of course, in practice, all of these characteristics intersect to make us the unique individuals that we are. We know that there are strong social justice reasons for diversity, but if the greater priority for you is to keep your business going and flourishing, then just as importantly, it works on that level too. To me, the most important thing for any business is to avoid groupthink. Groupthink is so comfortable and it's so seductive. You all have the same cultural references. You can finish each other's sentences. You've all seen the same films and know the same people. It's incredibly cozy, unchallenging, and homogenous, and it's a real threat to your business. I've actually sat on recruitment panels when interviewers have said, I was really drawn to David. He kind of reminded me of myself at a younger age. And if I had one of those, very loud QI-style klaxons, that's the moment when I would sound it. We've got one of you already. Why would we need another one, is what I feel like saying. And at the risk of stating the bleeding obvious, if you're in the creative industries, you need to bring in different perspectives to spark creativity. When I was running factual television programs at the BBC, I realized that the ideas we were getting from the development department were only speaking to part of the audience. We had a swathe of programs about child development, Little Angels, and it was that kind of era. At which point I realized that the department was mostly staffed with women coming back from maternity leave. They were in development because it gave them more predictable hours, which was completely fair enough. But I put a few men in there, and suddenly we got things like SAS, are you tough enough? And all sorts of male as well as female skewing ideas in the mix. To me, it's about being in touch with your audience. I mean, your audience is as diverse as you like. And if your company is from one small demographic, you won't understand most of the people who are using your product. At the BBC, which, in spite of all the flack, does try harder than most to do the right thing on diversity, but when we talked there about how to attract audiences from, say, less privileged social backgrounds, it was often approached as a piece of academic research. I wonder what the working classes want from us. Let's go and study them in detail. As opposed to having them in our midst, being them, and knowing instinctively. One of the current commissioners, Tom MacDonald, talked about arriving at Cambridge University from a northern working class background, thinking spaghetti came in tins, and having to assimilate quickly and pass as middle class in order not to be ridiculed. When I came from Belfast to Cambridge University, I found myself saddled with an identity I never knew I had. I'd always thought I was British, but it turned out I was Irish. Who knew? People kept saying, oh, you're the Irish one. And I go, no, I'm British. Until I realized that actually to be Irish meant they thought you were outgoing and liked to drink and were great fun at parties, at which point I decided to adopt my new Irish identity with enthusiasm. Unlike Tom, I decided to accentuate what was different, even if the identity others perceived me to have took a while for me to accept. So, of course, when someone joins your company, you want them to fit in, but not to the extent of being a clone of everybody else. I'd say celebrate the outsider, the person who's different, and don't make them assimilate all the way. Enable them to keep their different point of view, because that's what's valuable. That will protect you from what happened to, say, the banks in the financial crash, when their all-white male privileged boards didn't protect them by challenging the prevailing view on the wisdom of the risks they were taking. Challenge isn't cozy, but if it's supportive challenge, it can be the most valuable thing in the world. Testing an idea thoroughly inside the company is useful because it'll sure as hell get tested when it goes outside. And also, please don't do what I've seen some companies do and think, okay, we need a diverse person. Or, we're really pleased, we've hired a diverse person. What this is saying is, we're all normal, but you are diverse. We hope you'll be really happy here. BAME or differently abled people shouldn't have to have diversity as their specialist subject. When I brought Samir Shah onto the BAFTA board, I took a pride in the fact that I never once turned to him to ask him about diversity. That was owned by everybody and not particularly him. But never underestimate either how much of a draw a tolerant, diverse company is to prospective applicants. People want to work in modern, unstuffy, dynamic workplaces. And so there's a reason why employers put photographs of racially diverse, shiny, happy people having fun on their websites. It makes it look like a place where we'd all like to work, whatever our heritage or background. And as Rebecca was saying, I first met the folk from Wired Sussex when I chaired the advisory board for the Brighton Fuse project, which was done in conjunction with Brighton and Sussex universities. And the idea was to see why it is that Brighton works so well as a creative cluster, and to see what ideas could be transferred from here to other cities, hoping to emulate its success. There were many reasons for this, including the fusion between arts and technology in its most go-ahead businesses. But also cited was Brighton's embrace of the LGBTQ+ community, which made it a more welcoming, modern place for everyone to work, straight or gay. People cluster to inclusive, tolerant, forward-looking environments, at least in my experience, the people you really want to, and which company doesn't want to have their choice of talent? Diversity doesn't have to look the same for all organizations, and I think it's okay to start with what comes easiest and most naturally to your organization. As Sophie was saying, just up the road near Lewis, I'm on the board of the Charleston Trust, the wonderfully decorated house and beautiful garden where the Bloomsbury Group gathered in Sussex. Famously, the group were living in squares, painting in circles, and loving in triangles in the early 20th century. And as we've opened new galleries and exhibition space on the Charleston site, we want to channel the radical bohemian and sexually free heritage and spirit of the place through the eyes of modern artists. Hence our exhibition on Orlando at the present time, based on Virginia Woolf's gender-bending novel, and the queer tours of the house, which have proved extremely popular. So start diversifying in a way which your company finds most natural and build out from there. If you're looking at your organization and thinking it's not as diverse as it should be, an obvious place to start looking and to focus is on your hiring process. Who is doing it in your company, and have you got diversity in the recruitment people themselves? There's often a feeling of, oh, we just can't find the people, but maybe you just don't have the contacts. In my own experience, when I appointed Sita Kumar, now CEO of Screen Skills, as editor of Crime Watch, and she could appoint her own team, Within 6 months, we had the most brilliant and diverse team because she used her own network and contacts that other people didn't know. All the difficulties melt away when you appoint Edward Enninful as editor of Vogue, and suddenly the pages are full of models of colour, or Kwame Kweyama as artistic director of the Young Vic, and lots of new black writing talent is discovered. Certainly, it is easier to find BAME recruits in London, where they form over 40% of the population, than, say, Scotland, which has about 4%. But with entry-level positions, many small firms feel they'd be swamped if they put out a general ad, so rely on stumbling across people based on existing contacts. And many of these people will be the children of savvy middle classes or people who already work in the business. It's impossible to get those parents not to help their children. I know, I am that mother. So we need to give an active leg up to young people without these advantages. Consider creating links with your local university or further education college for work experience, or paid internships as BAFTA have done, or bringing in an apprentice on an accredited scheme. Added to this, there's a fear of the unknown, which I think particularly affects disabled people. Rather than have an honest conversation about what the person's needs are and what reasonable adjustments could be made to the workplace, employers sometimes duck out through fear or embarrassment, and they miss out on great talent. When I started in the media in the 1980s, people would sometimes be heard to say, yeah, we tried a woman once, but it didn't work out. Or, yeah, we did appoint a black person once, but we had to let them go. You know, it sounds ridiculous now, I hope. But we need to be careful about thinking there are whole groups of people whom we couldn't see ourselves employing. Apart from it being illegal, it's also massively wasteful of talent. So for me, it's about your frame of reference, your contacts, and your confidence in reaching out beyond the usual suspects. And I'd encourage you to think really hard about your selection criteria. Sometimes I look at the skills and experience required for, a relatively junior role and think, blimey, if somebody could do all that, they should be running the company. This puts off all but the overconfident, and there's a limit to how many of those you really want. At the BBC, I used to have a dread of having a department full of people who were really, really good at doing interviews, but much less good at doing the job itself. Sometimes massive self-belief and an entertaining manner are not the key skills you need, whether you're choosing a new member of staff or the next Prime Minister. Just saying. The answer is to make the selection process more akin to the job itself, with whatever tests and assessment that requires. In the end, you're looking for potential more than a CV which may be hyped up and exaggerated, particularly when you're dealing with entry level. At Pearson College London, where I'm chair of the governing body, we have courses at Escape Studios in animation, games art, excuse me, and visual effects. And for those, we require no academic qualifications at all. If you've got a good portfolio and we think you've got potential at a thoroughly testing assessment day, you're in. And I'd recommend that everyone who's recruiting should go on an unconscious bias course, particularly because it puts the training arguably where the problem is, not with them, but us, the recruiters. We all like to think we're scrupulously fair, but all of us have our biases, even ones we're not aware of. And if we act just on gut instinct, they're liable to come to the fore. There's the famous story about the Boston Orchestra, which was largely male, and they conducted an experiment to try to recruit more female musicians. Auditions were conducted behind a curtain, so the panel couldn't see whether the person playing was male or female. And indeed, the number of women recruited went up a bit. But then they realized that because the female candidates were walking in across a wooden floor, the panel could still hear the sound of their heels and knew if they were male or female. So they put down carpet, and finally the numbers evened up. And I'm sure that panel thought they were being completely fair-minded throughout, but assumptions they didn't even know they were making got in the way. And if you're in an area where there aren't enough good candidates to go round, it's even more important that you set out your stall in the right way. And never ever forget that the interview goes in both directions. I was at an event in Facebook recently discussing recruitment, and it was interesting to me, they're very conscious that many women in particular present themselves less confidently at interview. And in fact, HR there often takes a kind of coaching role in order to prepare them. So remember that you can take positive action by going looking for diverse candidates and giving them work experience or training opportunities to prepare them for assessment, as long as there isn't positive discrimination at the moment of recruitment itself. And given that there are far more girls studying STEM coming out of single sex rather than coeducational schools, it seems hard to argue that the lack of women choosing these subjects is to do with something innate. We still bring boys and girls up in a very gendered way in this country, and there's still a lot of pressure to conform. I find it very sad that a little girl's self-esteem peaks at 8 years old. In my executive coaching work, I find that with the women I coach, it's nearly always at some level about confidence, even in the most senior women. My aim is for women to be authentically themselves at work, rather than having to turn in an Oscar-winning performance on a daily basis, which is frankly really wearing. I want to help underconfident women find their voice, embrace speaking publicly and at meetings. There's no point in having a diverse workforce if half of them don't dare to speak. That's why we've got to work outwards from the concept of diversity to one of proper inclusion within organizations and ultimately empowerment. As a board director of Women in Film and Television and part of the Time's Up movement in the UK, I can see that much more needs to be done, whether that's on the gender pay gap or bullying and harassment cases. That's why for the last 8 months, I've been working in the BBC as a senior hearing manager, making judgments on equal pay grievances and bullying cases. Now, there's no doubt that we have come a long way from when I started in the BBC in the 1980s, when people would tell sexist and even racist jokes and expect you to laugh at them. That wouldn't happen now, but I sometimes wonder if that prejudice is actually still there and it's just gone underground and is harder to spot. When I took charge of training at the BBC and launched the BBC Academy, there was a great push to bring in apprentices who were younger, poorer, and less well educated than our usual graduate trainees. If you try to change a culture swiftly, there's a real danger of a kind of tissue rejection and that they all leave again as swiftly as they arrive. It was clear to us that some of the apprentices were leading very difficult lives and they needed more pastoral support than we expected, and also occasionally just to be cut some slack. But the organisation has retained the vast majority, increased their numbers, and has been immeasurably enriched by them. At BAFTA, as chair, I wanted to harness the enormous goodwill that the organisation engenders with those at the top of the industry through its awards ceremonies to help those at the other end just trying to get in. We want the most talented people to be able to shine, whatever their background. And so BAFTA tries to take away the things that get in the way, the barriers in the form of lack of money, connections, and career advice. We've set up paid scholarships, mentoring, and highlighted emerging talent. We set up an open access website called BAFTA Guru, which I'd actually thoroughly recommend to anyone thinking of a career in film, TV, or games. And we've now gone beyond entry level to mid-career schemes such as Elevate and BAFTA Crew. Most controversially of all, we said that no film would be eligible for the coveted Outstanding British Film Award unless the film met the BFI diversity standards. But rather than just leave it at that, then BAFTA and the BFI have worked together with productions to increase their diversity and ensure that no film ends up being excluded. So as well as supporting the individuals, we're also motivating employers to take them on. And I think that the best diversity strategies need to work at both the industrial level and at the individual levels to succeed. But the main thing I'd like you to take away from this is a renewed determination to take positive action on diversity. There's never been so much discussion about it, but maybe in the immortal words of Elvis Presley, we need a little less conversation and a little more action. The Skills and Talent Manifesto being launched today is an important step in the right direction. It will do your business good to be seen to have signed up, but we will do it even more good to fully implement each of its pledges with a clear and concrete plan of how you're going to get there. We need to marshal all the talents in this wonderful part of the country. And when you've attracted a diverse and brilliant workforce, make sure they're able to give of their best and are empowered within your organization. Remember, you don't have to be a voice for the voiceless, just pass the mic. Thank you.